244 hours into the blackout over Zaporizhia Oblast, 3 Ukrainian strike quads sliced across the night. Beneath them, an 8-car consist crawled along the rails, 560 tons of fuel bound for forward units, enough to keep 2 battalions moving for a week. The crew riding that train had no idea what was coming. In less than a minute, their supply would stop fueling tanks and start igniting the sky. This was not a crude hit. It was a 5-drone operation executed like clockwork. One modified DJI Mavic 3 sat off to the flank as the Overwatch Eye, holding station roughly 8 kilometers away. 3 purpose-built FPV attack quads formed the Spear, one-way strike platforms, and a second Mavic waited as a backup observer in case the main eye was blinded. These weren't store-bought playthings. Field-modified reconnaissance Mavics ran experimental firmware to extend zoom and were retrofitted with thermal cores to reveal tiny temperature contrasts across the night. Flying near 70 km/h, they gave persistent, high-resolution overwatch. The FPVs, by contrast, were stripped-down racers with 7-inch props and powerful brushless motors, built for speed, stability, and the single job of striking and detonating. In terminal dives, they topped over 140 km/h. In a hardened command bunker 30 kilometers away, operators watched thermal blooms resolve into a locomotive's hot block, the unmistakable white bloom of a diesel engine against the cold ground. Identification was instant and secure. Encrypted feeds the Russian aeroscope tools couldn't tag. The Mavic's live feed was piped to 3 FPV pilots, each poised on a controller with a warhead strapped to his quad. Each FPV carried a 2.6 kilo-shaped charge, engineered to defeat the thin armor of a fuel car. These warheads weren't slapdash. A tungsten alloy penetrator formed the first stage to breach 12mm steel. Then an incendiary second stage detonated to ignite the tank contents. The shaped charge focused energy into a molten jet traveling at phenomenal speed, able to flash fuel to fire in a fraction of a second. Intelligence had done the heavy lifting. For 72 hours, a human network tracked this exact train, partisans and civilians under occupation, noting schedules on phones, logging speed and amenability to attack. They found the brief 15-minute window when the convoy would be far from overlapping air defense umbrellas. With that human confirmation and the Mavic's visual lock, the kill box was set. The lead FPV peeled from holding altitude and began a low glide toward the moving target. Navigation was hybrid. Encrypted sat-nav for the long approach, switching to terminal optical guidance in the last 15 seconds. The FPV hunters lock onto visual signatures rather than coordinates in the terminal phase. This dual system lets them ride denial on the way in and hunt by sight at the end. But the Russians were not idle. At roughly the 0244-hour mark, an L3 truck-mounted EW cluster wailed to life. Antennae pumped high-power noise across 30 kilometers, seeking to sever control links and blind the assault. The EW began with broadband suppression, blanketing multiple bands with static, and then shifted to focused spot jamming aimed at common drone bands like 2.4 GHz. Under that barrage, many systems would die, but these drones and pilots had been built precisely for contesting this threat. Their data links used frequency-hopping spread spectrum, dancing channels hundreds of times per second and spanning bands to defeat lock. The Mavic observer, meanwhile, hunted clear channels and routed the feed through alternate slices as antennas flicked. The FPV pilot toggled to a secondary frequency and the quad's link re-established, slipping through the jam like smoke. When jamming failed to sever the approach, the Russians moved to GPS spoofing, broadcasting false satellite positions to confuse navigation. The FPVs relied on inertial measurement units for resilience. The IMU's accelerometers and gyros detected contradictions between fake GPS and real movement, and the guidance stack rejected corrupted fixes. The drone then continued by inertial dead reckoning and vision. The Mavic continued to feed targeting, and the lead drone's onboard computer locked onto tank car structural features using trained image models. In the terminal phase, the strike drones switched to autonomous mode. Operators pulled hands back and let onboard vision compute micro-corrections. At the designated location, the first FPV hit Car 3. The Shape Charge's tungsten penetrator tore through 12mm steel, and the incendiary stage detonated, vaporizing hundreds of liters of diesel in a millisecond. The thermal camera in the Mavic recorded a tiny spark explode into a supernova. The pressure wave ruptured the tank, and the train's own coupling and venting systems turned against it. Vents linked cars into a conduit for flame. Within seconds, the adjacent tank cars were engulfed as vapors ignited. The locomotive triggered emergency brakes, and the line jammed into a single burning target. The second FPV used the expanding smoke as concealment and dove on Car 6 as operators designated. Thermal optics locked the intact tank despite light distorting heat, shimmer from nearby flames. The Shape Charge punched and ignited another mass of diesel, another massive fireball. At the same time, the third operator angled in from the rear and hit the eighth car, completing the cascading sequence. Within roughly 90 seconds, 3 precision strikes had lit up 560 tons of fuel. The Inferno stabilized into its own meteorology, convection columns pulling air into the blaze, sending smoke and heat 200+ meters into the sky. Rails warped into ribbons, wooden ties burned to ash, debris strewn for hundreds of meters. The railway was effectively destroyed. Repairs would take weeks under calm conditions, longer if strikes continued. A critical logistics artery severed by a handful of skilled operators, some courageous civilian spotters, and 3 precisely timed strikes, all captured in high resolution from the Mavic's thermal feed. What had supplied forward operations for days was now a 6-hour conflagration. This was the new arithmetic of modern war. Cheap strike platforms, clever human intelligence, and modified commercial airframes multiplied lethality. A few $1,000s in hardware neutralized millions in materiel and degraded an entire line of supply. The battlefield effect rippled. With fuel gone, operations pause. Without fuel, artillery and vehicles stand still. The accountants at logistics and the commanders in the field both felt the impact. The piece ends as the video does. A glowing column rising over the rails and the command bunker logging mission success. The final shot is a teachable moment, an illustration of how small teams leveraging asymmetric tools can achieve strategic outcomes normally reserved for ordnance-heavy operations. The era in which rear area logistics were safe by virtue of distance and assumed depth is ending. If 3 FPVs struck 35 km tonight, tomorrow, the range could stretch further. Now, a few skilled operators and a handful of drones can remake a supply map. This is the Fieldcraft behind the headline: Reconnaissance Mavics, hardened FPV strike frames, frequency-hopped links, inertial resilience, human spotters, and precise shaped charges, linked into a surgical attack. The result: 560 tons of Russian fuel gone. Subscribe for more breakdowns and on-the-ground technical analysis.